This message comes from Jerry. Noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers, so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't overpay. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/NPR today.
Can you list all the different kinds of non-monogamous relationships you know of? Not descriptions, but just a list.
Polygamy, polyamory, there are subsets of polyamory. We have ethical non-monogamy. There are different relationship styles within that, whether it's hierarchical, primary. There are egalitarian polyamory, kitchen tables, people talk about it, or garden party, these kind of different associations that people have with how the family dynamic should kind of work. The list goes on and on.
The list goes on. Okay, well, so there are a lot of ways to be non-monogamous, but one thing I was really surprised to learn, a full third of Americans describe their ideal relationship as something other than completely monogamous, according to a YouGov survey from 2023. Like on a scale of 0 being completely monogamous and 6 being completely non-monogamous, 1/3 of Americans put their answer somewhere beyond 0. And there are a lot of different types of non-monogamy, but one of those types, polyamory, has been in the discourse as of late. Polyamory means having relationships that are not monogamous and can include openly dating more than one person. And the polyamory that writer Lindy West describes in her new book, Adult Braces, has spawned 1,000 takes. There are takes on her specific situation, which started as a marriage to artist Hamifule Oluo and became a throuple with his new girlfriend. And I get why Lindy's story has shaken up the culture a little bit. Her path to polyamory was admittedly kind of dicey, but I noticed a thing happening that kind of always happens when polyamory comes up. Both people who are pro and anti-polyamory get really intense about it. It's not just about personal preference either. Polyamory can stand in for a set of political beliefs, class associations, and other signifiers that have nothing to do with how many partners you have. But why does a choice about relationship structures feel so weighty? And why can't anyone be normal about it? I'm here with Christopher M. Gleason, lecturer of American history at Georgia State University and the author of American Poly, a book about the history of polyamory in America. Christopher, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. So I know polyamory has been around a long time, but when did it start to kind of form as a movement in the U.S.?
That's a good question. I believe polyamory as a movement really began to take hold kind of after the 1960s. I think you see people kind of playing with ideas that we could call polyamory in the 20s and 30s, but really it's kind of a series of ideas that came together to create kind of a movement where people were organizing and defining terms and arguing for things really in the post-60s, 70s.
Okay, and what kind of politics surrounded it at that time?
It's really interesting. The kind of political history of polyamory is maybe not what you would expect.
Okay.
A lot of people who were organizers in the 60s and 70s were very anti-establishment. They were coming out of the 60s counterculture. And some of them actually were very libertarian in a lot of their approaches. I think of the Zells. Morning Glory Zell was someone who coined the term polyamory in the 90s.
Oh.
And she and her husband in the 60s, they were actually like anti-left and right. They would support some conservative candidates like Barry Goldwater in the 60s because they thought, communism or socialism was just as oppressive as the capitalist system had been in a lot of ways. And they were just anti-establishment. Government should stay out of your relationships kind of altogether.
Interesting. I feel like the association, like the political association with polyamory now is just so different. Like there's a sheen of progressiveness to it now. I definitely think so. In Lindy West's memoir, she talks about her spouse kind of implying that monogamy is a kind of ownership akin to slavery, which I was like, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's quite it, but okay. But it was implying that like polyamory was more ethical than monogamy. And I think some polyamorists view it as being like the only politically and morally correct way to go about relationships. How did it get that kind of association?
I think the history of polyamory as an idea is from kind of a libertarian, hands-off government, it evolved into this new form of liberal orthodoxy in a way. And that history is through these people coming out of the 60s and 70s trying to reformulate their ideas about free love into something that is sustainable long-term. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were organizing during the Reagan era where there was this focus on family values, conservative politics. I don't even want to say they adapted their message. I think that's just, they were in line with that approach. And so they actually would argue that, the longer history of mankind, people were non-monogamous. It's not a progressive thing. It's actually a going back to how people have always lived, if we take a long view of human history.
Right. I mean, that's debatable, and there have been scholars who argue that monogamy was the dominant relationship structure of ancient times. Others argue it was polyamory, but I can see why polyamorists fell to one side of that argument.
And so they began organizing and putting together panels and literature and pulling together a coalition. And then when the internet really kind of took hold of media, these ideas distributed much wider than they had hoped to get it that far out. But a lot of times they were unable, and the internet kind of dispersed it into American society. And when that happened, people began taking those ideas into different places. And I think with the cultural turn, specifically, if I think of like the acceptance of homosexuality, right, and other queer sexualities through the AIDS epidemic and into the kind of turn of the century, these ideas kind of came in with that as people became more and more accustomed to people becoming divorced, having second and third marriages, which was, really frowned upon in the 50s and, prior to that. There's just this evolution of family cultures. And I think that with the acceptance of queer lifestyles, a lot of queer Americans have practiced ethical non-monogamy for a very long time. And so you begin to see kind of new and different expressions of sexuality in popular media, on TV. And eventually this became kind of a progressive statement, right? That, I mean, like you said, you're talking about how it's a deviation from ideas of ownership, or it's even kind of some post-colonial way of, rekindling the way people should relate to each other.
That's interesting. When I think about non-monogamous relationships, if I think about like how I was first introduced to the idea, I think it probably was through more conservative religious practices like Mormon polygamy. So I guess there kind of has always been a spectrum, but it's so interesting to hear about sort of how this conflation between progressive politics and practicing polyamory kind of came together. I also have seen this connected to this idea that like polyamory can quote unquote fix things that are often wrong, particularly in heterosexual relationship dynamics. For example, there was just an article in The Cut titled, "Could Opening Your Marriage Lighten Your Mental Load?" And it was about how some moms who opened their marriages also found ways to split housework or childcare more evenly, or take more time for themselves away from the home. But I do think that there is this idea in there that like polyamory, this like progressive relationship structure, again, not saying that that's exactly what it is, but maybe that's how people are perceiving it, can fix what's broken about the, like retrograde heterosexual relationships.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. I think that there is a tendency of advocates of polyamory to portray it as kind of a fix-all or kind of this ideal. And I think that it can bring some really helpful, I mean, you mentioned shared resources, shared housework, kind of the things that make life hard. You can have a division of responsibility that is beneficial in a lot of ways. But I think also anybody that's ever delved into ethical non-monogamy realizes that that's only a part of the story as well. And that's always been a talking point. When you see the organizers, even in the 80s, they were making those arguments about, your kids are going to have more opportunity, more support. And that's true. It also comes with a lot of new problems and issues. And I mean, some people are just not geared to deal with the jealousy or things that emerge. And some people really are. And I think that a more responsible approach is to not look at polyamory as a fix-all, and to be able to say, this is a beneficial lifestyle or relationship structure for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, whether it's being able to explore sexuality in a different way, if it's shared responsibilities, even if it's, I want somebody that plays tennis and my partner doesn't, something like that, right? Connection in some way. But it also is going to come with a lot of long conversations about boundaries. Feelings are going to get violated on some level at some point. You have to be able to repair and communicate and deal with those things. So some people are just not built for it.
I appreciate what you just shared about like how it's a relationship structure, not like necessarily like a how-to manual, but the idea that it's like this fix-all. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of how monogamous people talk about marriage, getting married is going to fix whatever is going wrong in their relationship. Or, I mean, people also act the same way about having kids together.
They do. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, this institution is going to fix it. Like, I think sometimes people want labels or structures, et cetera, to do some of the relationship scaffolding work for them. Never mind the fact, like, I am married. I've been married now, I think next month I'm like 4 years. It's been great. It's been so fab. And I like being married to him, but I like being married as me to him. I couldn't necessarily tell someone else, oh yeah, you should get married. Like, it's the best thing ever. I don't know who they're going to get married to. I don't know what they like.
Right.
I don't know what's going to work for them. I'd feel funny recommending like the relationship structure to somebody. There's so much that goes along with it that you still have to like be compatible. Like you said, have lots of conversations about your expectations and boundaries. Like, just because you subscribe to a certain relationship structure, it doesn't necessarily guarantee happiness just by following it.
Even marriage, monogamy the statistics aren't great, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And most people are serial monogamists, right? Historically, right? And in the US at least. A lot of times when people think about polyamory, they accept this narrative of serial monogamy. You can be married a second, third, fourth times, as, especially after the 70s, 80s, this became fairly normalized. But if you do them all at once, people are like, no, that's crazy. You can't have all these relationships at one time. You have to do them in sequential order in order for it to be like acceptable in some way.
I will say, I mean, I kind of get why, thinking about like sort of some of the arguments that some people might make about polyamory, that it's progressive or that it can fix relationships. I can see why those sorts of ideas could be important for some polyamorists to put forward. Like, for some, they may feel like that's true, that this is actually how they feel. But I could also imagine a pressure to show the world that polyamory is working for them, that it is good, that it's not just sanctioned cheating like some people I think may assume. It's still somewhat uncommon and seen by some as wrong. And so I guess I could see how they'd want to give explanations for how, like why it's not, why it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. But first, if any of you are finding It's Been a Minute for the first time, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the show and that you come back every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning for brand new episodes. And every Tuesday, a video episode. You can find them on Spotify or YouTube, or just listen to the audio wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up after the break.
I think there's so much where it's seen as provocative. So the last few years of when you see it on TV, it's going to be in some kind of sexualized setting many times.
Stick around.
This message comes from Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
This message comes from NPR sponsor BetterHelp. Financial stress affects more than just your bank account. It can impact your sleep, your relationships, and your overall mental health. If money worries are weighing on you, you're not alone. And it doesn't mean you failed. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the anxiety, shame, or overwhelming thoughts that money stress can bring. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Get 10% off at BetterHelp.com/NPR.
This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics with I Swear, starring Robert Aramayo. The extraordinary true story of John Davidson and his journey toward acceptance while living with a misunderstood condition in 1980s Britain. Now playing only in theaters.
I mean, we've been talking about the whole discourse surrounding Lindy West's new memoir, Adult Braces. But I mean, this isn't the first time that like a big polyamory conversation has happened in the culture. The release of Molly Roden-Winter's book, More, from 2024, kind of sparked similar conversations. But I'm also remembering that around the book's release, The Atlantic published an article by Tyler Austin Harper that posited that polyamory was just, quote, the latest lifestyle fad that is little more than yet another way for the ruling class to have their cake and eat it too. I see you nodding. The idea was that like polyamory is like a way for rich people to pass the time by doing psychological warfare on their partners. I hear you laughing already, but I wonder, I don't know, what do you make of that association though? Like one that I don't think, to my knowledge, comes from polyamorists themselves.
No, I remember very well when More came out. The whole narrative there was like, rich people in Park Slope or wherever get to talk about this thing and, partake in this thing because they have this lifestyle or leisure or whatever it is. And I didn't love that because, especially looking at the larger landscape of polyamory, there's so many people practicing polyamory nationally that are not in those situations. And it's very more grounded in going to work every day and raising the kids.
I want to touch on one more big narrative surrounding polyamory, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people think about it as sanctioned cheating. Going back to the Lindy West situation, just to be clear, her original partner, Aham, now identifies as non-binary and uses he, they pronouns, but she refers to him as her husband in the book. And a lot of the chatter about her dynamic with him is that people feel like it reproduces some patriarchal dynamics. And I think there's a fear for some that heterosexual polyamory, like writ large, is just a way for men to be with multiple women without consequences. Like, for example, Twitter user Gravy, with 6 Ys, said about Lindy West, quote, "You can't spend decades being a feminist thought leader and then let a man trick you in front of the whole world into being in a poly relationship," end quote. Again, Aham is not a man, but like, I will say in this instance, West herself describes being quite uncomfortable with the idea of being in a poly relationship. And she has to like really push herself to come around to it to keep her partner. And maybe she's happy now, which is great, but she does not seem to go into that relationship structure happily. I'm not saying like her experience is everyone's experience, but I do think that people are skeptical of the gender of all this, given that she started in what was a straight monogamous relationship and she was reluctant to go into something different. I should say for the record, like, I am monogamous. I completely support people who are polyamorous, including the producer of this episode. But I want to know, what do you make of a lot of people's resistance to polyamory, especially when they see examples like Lindy's or even Molly Roden-Winter's that don't seem 100% rosy and sometimes can have some like dynamics that echo some like not so fun parts about like heterosexual like sort of dating culture and just relationship structures more broadly?
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said on kind of both of those accounts. With Molly, you're following this person through their journey, and I think you see these kind of issues that pop up or red flags, or if there's kind of dishonesty on a part or something like that, it rubs what I would call like poly purists, the people that think that there's a right, ethical way, right, to practice this. So, there's some issues that people would have in kind of that journey. Mm-hmm. I think especially with Lindy West, you have a lot of different issues. I mean, you have somebody who is kind of this feminist icon, and now there's this, her reluctance to go into it in the first place, and it kind of being this, well, if you don't accept this, you're kind of, basically a colonizer mindset, or there's this, you're owning me in some way that is not there's just so many different levels. I think what's interesting about both of those, because even though maybe they're not your everyday polyamorists, in your neighborhood or something, they do show the complex nature of polyamorous relationships, right? Because I do think that a lot of people will have experiences where one of the partners wants to do it and the other person doesn't. That's very common. Sometimes that works out in the end. A lot of times it doesn't, and people end up parting ways or finding someone else or staying stuck in something that's very contentious for a long time. That is, I think, really important to kind of note. It does also bring up this idea, not just of sanctioned cheating, but also of this patriarchal male gaze approach to dating or relationships. And ethical non-monogamy is an attempt at an ethical non-monogamous system, even if we say that system might fail. I mean, I see non-monogamy so widespread now that I recently watched that documentary that came out about the manosphere, and it was following Andrew Tate.
Oh, by Louis Theroux, yeah.
And it was so interesting to see, there's just these very vocal advocates that say it is man's nature to be promiscuous in a certain way. And the gender dynamics that should define relationships are very hierarchical, with men in a certain role and women in a certain role. And part of that role for men is to be able to have sex widely and openly. And the flip side is that women do not have that same ability. And any kind of traditional understanding of polyamory would reject that. And this is why a lot of polyamorists distance themselves from like Mormon polygamy. It's the idea that there is not a gender egalitarian, or the same rules don't apply, right? And I think when we see the critiques of adult braces, or kind of this approach where there's something that's very uncomfortable about the relationship that's stereotypically patriarchal or oppressive in some way, then there is this other really exploitive and detrimental version of male sexuality that is inherently toxic.
Yeah, and these things are not the same. As you said, I think there's more of an attempt at equality on polyamorous' part, even if that might fail at times. That said, I know some people do have quite bad experiences with polyamory. And I think part of that is there aren't that many good models for polyamory in many people's lives. As you mentioned, it requires a lot of boundaries and communication. It can be really hard. I mean, pretty much any kind of romantic relationship, but you also don't have the added sort of cultural cushioning of being this really exalted, embraced relationship structure like monogamous marriage, where I also will say, I think many people have not seen good models for marriage in their lives. However, it's so socially sanctioned and so socially, like I said, exalted, that people will go out of their way to try to give you some sort of advice, or, like I said, some sort of cultural cushion to kind of nudge you back toward it. Yeah. That doesn't really exist for polyamory, in addition to the fact that people don't have really many good models to look at. So I could see how, that puts a lot of people in a position to just not have a great experience, even if the experience itself is not the most damaging thing ever. And even if you're not having an experience practicing polyamory with a person who's just a bad person who's deceitful or something like that, it's still, you're not necessarily set up for success if that's the kind of relationship structure that you want to get into.
Yeah, models, representation. I mean, I think there's so much where it's seen as provocative. So the last few years of when you see it on TV, it's going to be in some kind of sexualized setting many times. Mm-hmm. We don't see kind of, communally, there's not a lot of examples of it working out. I can't think of my conservative parents. I was raised very conservative Christian. I can't ever see them thinking, well, you just need an extra partner. That's so foreign. Whereas, the push towards lifelong monogamous marriage is instantiated not just in family culture, but also in law. I mean, everything from taxes to, it's everything, right? And there's a long history to that as well. So maybe if we can see moving forward some more culturally appropriate examples that are a little more grounded, they're not necessarily, the ruling class or the hypersexualized versions, but it's kind of, I think, what we would kind of term as everyday polyamory, then perhaps it will become culturally more stable. Monogamy
is also famously not easy, as we discussed.
Yeah.
And many people fail at it, but without acknowledging that to their partner, let's say.
Yeah.
I feel and I'll say as someone, a woman who's married to a man, I feel like I grew up with the idea, and also still see that around today, just very present in our culture, that a straight woman should not expect, or a woman who dates men should not expect that that any man that they date or even are partnered with or married to, you can't expect a man to fully conform to monogamy. That is I think a big cultural assumption, right? I don't know. Conversely, though, we are told to strive for it.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite interesting. If there's going to be, messy and inconsiderate ways to do relationship, or thoughtful and kind ways to do relationship, why do we bother kind of vilifying one version over the other?
I don't even think that we should take it as necessarily a pragmatic approach as it works for some people and not for others. I think it works for some people at certain points in their life and not for others. I've seen a lot of people who earlier in their lives were very big advocates of it. This fulfills me now. I'm having all of these interactions. I'm introduced to these new ideas. My sex drive is high. I can, make everyone happy at the same time. Like it's just kind of a point in life. And then later in life, they will settle down and they'll say that was great. And it's just not something I need anymore. One of the secondary characters that I followed was a huge mouthpiece for the benefits. I mean, everything we've talked about, from sexual exploration, personal autonomy, psychological fulfillment, any kind of connection, huge advocate for a version of polyamory for 20, 30 years. And then as she got a little bit later in life, she changed her mind. She said that was great for me back then, but right now I have preference for one person over another, and I'm choosing to be monogamous now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I even think about, I certainly know of people who were in monogamous relationships, monogamous marriages, and then their marriage ends, and then they're not interested in getting back into the same kind of arrangement again. They're like, that was good, that was cool for the time, but now I'm interested in doing things a different way. That's really interesting, and that feels like such a point that I have not heard in any of these conversations. Christopher, I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Christopher M. Gleason, lecturer of American history at Georgia State University and the author of American Poly, a book about the history of polyamory in America. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Engineering support came from
Zoe Van Genoven.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. If you're tired of spending hundreds on big wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks, Mint Mobile might be right for you with plans starting from $15 a month. Shop plans today at mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. This message comes from Jerry. Many people are overpaying on car insurance. Why? Switching providers can be a pain. Jerry helps make the process painless. Jerry is the only app that compares rates from over 50 insurers in minutes and helps you switch fast with no spam calls or hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Before you renew your car insurance policy, download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/NPR. This message comes from IXL. Spring is here and school testing is just around the corner. IXL can help. Make an impact on your child's learning. Receive 20% off an IXL membership if you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.